my name is John Mayer. I'm the Executive Director of Cali. Why do I always repeat that? I think that's so I can tell myself where I'm at. So I've got some housekeeping, some very simple stuff, and then we'll get on with our keynote speaker. The videos will be, we're live streaming and also recording all the sessions, so they'll be up on YouTube by the end of July. Actually, Elmer promises earlier than that, but as I always like to say, under promise, over deliver. The post-conference evaluation link is in Slack right now, but it will be on the conference website soon. Please take a moment either today, tomorrow, or in the near future when you're feeling good to fill out the post-conference evaluation. We crave that feedback. We use it every year. We look at past ones to determine what things went right. We tweak all the time. And so your feedback is extremely valuable to us. You also can go to the conference website and where you registered and can log in and click the number of stars or leave a comment. It's not an anonymous comment. Leave a comment under any session if you wanted to give any advice to any of the speakers about how well or how poorly they did. I'm sure they would appreciate feedback of that sort. The leftover, if you have any light rail tickets left over, or you only need one more to get someplace tomorrow or something like that, return any of those to Levon or any Cali staff, or there will be a box in, is it room 125? 145? Whatever, it's the registration room, the room where you've been returning your raffles sheets and things like that, and they will be donated to the DU Law Clinic. Thanks, Marjorie and Scott and others for arranging for that. All right? Make sure you stick around for the raffle, which is in room 165. That's right after the last session, which I think is 1 o'clock, right? And then there's box lunches being set up right about that same time. And announce the location of CALIcon15. And I think I'll wait. All right, I'll tell you. So it's so CALIcon15, we already know it's going to be in Atlanta next year at the brand new, still haven't moved into it as of this moment, moving in right now as we speak, and that's why Chris, the library director, is here. Georgia State University. And unfortunately, we got a really crappy, cheesy hotel. I've never heard of them before. The Ritz-Carlton arranged for that. So we'll have some good digs while we're at that conference. All right. Let me alt-tab. And talk about Zeynep Tufekci, Professor Tufekci. She's an assistant professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, at the School of Information and Library Science, the iSchool, right? But you're also a Berkman, what's the title? A Berkman Associate at the Harvard Berkman Center. But I ran across her, I read a lot of stuff about technology and its impact, and I was especially interested in her writings on algorithms and how our perception of the world is being mediated by technology that we can't see. It's a black box. And the nature of that black box is being, I won't say manipulated. Yes, I'll say manipulated or changed or adjusted according to forces that may involve money, politics, or decisions that we aren't aware of. And I'm especially interested in that because of the work being done in automated legal processes where the research algorithms or the algorithms behind tools that help you solve a legal problem can often be non-transparent. And you don't know whether they're based on opinion, fact, or even proper or up-to-date law. And so for that reason, we had a couple of conversations, and I thought that she would be an excellent person to kick us off on this Saturday. So, Zeynep?
So this is on, right? Hi, so my name is Zeynep Tufekci. It really is K before C. It's Turkish. And Turkish is not an Indo-European language, so that's... And I'm originally from Turkey, but the reason that I'm doing the work I'm doing is probably because I have had a long-term interest in computing, first as a technical person, and then as a sociologist. I got interested in computers as a teenager. It was 11, 12 when I got my first computer. I learned how to code, and it was fascinating. I thought it was very interesting. And I grew up in Turkey under the military regime's aftermath, when information was greatly restricted and things were really closed down. We had one television channel which showed American soap operas, which made no sense. So we used to, like, if you said, did you watch television, it meant the television, one channel, right? And usually it was, I think on Saturdays it was Dallas. You can imagine, you know, being in Istanbul and watching Dallas. It's like, who are these people and why are they living in a ranch and why are they always drinking whiskey and hate each other? It was just really bizarre. And on Sundays we had Little House on the Prairie, which was even bizarre. It's like, because see, I come from part of the world where every bit of land that can be built upon has been built upon by 3 different empires and 7 different occupiers, and there's been various good and not so good history built into everything. And the idea frontier, even as an imagination, made no sense. Who is this woman and why is she here? And Laura Ingalls. But that's what we had. And then came the internet. So that I lived through that transition, just having one television and not. And I chose computer programming partly because I became really concerned as a kid with the ethical implications of technology. And I was originally very interested in math and science, and like every kid, you know, elementary school was interested in math and science. I first wanted to be a physicist. I thought that's so fascinating. We can figure out how the world works. But as many kids who get interested in math and science and want to be a physicist go through, you know, around maybe 5th, 6th grade, I started reading about the atom bomb and all the issues, and I thought, wow, there's all these ethical problems with being a physicist. And I thought, let me pick a topic that doesn't have ethical implications. And I needed a job quickly, so I became like a computer programmer. That's what I majored in my undergrad. And now my physicist friends are trying to figure out who's going to discover the Higgs boson and get the Nobel Prize, and no other relevance in the world, while the Pentagon is developing killer robots. So I know how to pick non-ethically, ethically unimportant things for sure. So I find myself, I became really interested in the social implications of these technologies, partly while working as a programmer. My family situation was, well, let's just say it was super dysfunctional. So I started working as a teenager as a programmer in regular corporations in Istanbul, and I was just, you know, programming computers and babysitting them and fixing them and making them do things. And it was during that transition where computers were not very common, even in, you know, outside Turkey, let alone Turkey. And I distinctly remember the managers sort of coming gingerly and wondering what the heck this thing was. And one of them once asked me, "Can it tell if I'm lying?" Now in Turkish, wonderful non-Indo-European language it is, there's no gender pronouns. So when I say he, she, or it, it's the same pronoun. So when he said, "Can it tell if I'm lying?" I didn't really understand. I was like, can who tell if I'm lying? And why are we whispering? He was like, "Can it tell if I'm lying?" The computer. I did say I was a teenager, right? I said yes. And I think he was having an affair with the receptionist. But, you know, it's okay. You know, it's fine. So I lied. And of course it was a lie, but I'm now reading, it's 2015, and I'm reading about emotional detection software that is better than humans in picking up attempts at being deceitful. So I was joking then, it's not so funny now. So let me sort of start with my first slide. So another thing as a geek kid I did was watch Star Wars as soon as I could, rather than, you know, Laura Ingalls. That was my better ideal. And, you know, these are sort of these archetypal computers, I think. I mean, the movie is often discussed for its archetype hero, right? You have Luke Skywalker, kind of Homer character, comes back. You have the coming of age. So you got every archetype in human mythology kind of built into the story. But to me, the interesting archetype there is the future archetypes of computing. We have R2-D2 and C3PO. And if you haven't watched Star Wars, I have nothing to say to you, and we're done. So I'm not going to explain them. But as you know, of course, R2-D2 is the one that fixes stuff and hacks into Death Star and, you know, just figures out, and you're the one. It's the one that's your toaster that's very, very helpful. And I think for a long time, that was kind of our image of what computers were going to do, and we were worried about them, but not maybe. You know, we were going to have nice little R2-D2s doing our stuff. Well, I think we actually have a bigger threat from Mr. Polite C3PO, who's figuring out human culture, and who's figuring out human understanding, and who's sort of becoming an intermediary between people, between ourselves and our interactions, both legal, not legal, social, political. So I'm actually really worried about C3PO. And unfortunately, it doesn't come in that visible form. It just gets built in. So the computing that I'm worried about is the ones with complexity, opacity, and subjectivity. What I mean is, I'm really not worried, for example, about this. I'm not worried about automation and flying. In fact, you know, I fly a lot, and I feel so good. As soon as I get on a plane, I'm on an object. Yes, it's a, you know, thin metal curling through space. Well, it doesn't sound very good, but you know what? Rich people fly it, Congress people fly it, so they're worried about it. That's good. My pilots are tested, observed, watched, trained. That's all very good. And the software is really, 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 really debugged. In fact, you know, I'm fairly statistically oriented, and on my way to the airport on a cab, I'm usually like, I don't like this. You know, I see all the people texting. Next lane over, I'm not feeling comfortable. I'm like, let me get on that plane. Let me be hurled through space at great speed. In fact, I did research during the Gezi protests in Turkey. I do social movement research a lot. That's my substantive area besides this one. And during the, I went back to the protest. I went back to Turkey during the protest to do interviews and participant observation, otherwise known as getting a lot of tear gas, in the park. And people were really worried about me. They were like, "Oh, you're going back to the middle of the turmoil." I'm like, "Yes, I'm a social movement researcher." So I got on the plane and I got like a zillion worried tweets, people saying, "Take care of yourself." And I got off and I'm like, people, okay. I got off the plane. As soon as I'm on the cab, that's the moment you should be scared of me. I'm in a cab from the airport in Istanbul to Gezi Park in Istanbul. That is the most dangerous part of my journey. As soon as I'm in the park, tear gas, that's much less statistically problematic. Because automation and taking the human element out of automation or making it sort of work with the computer, it's something that is very heavily calibrated for, well, planes not falling out of the sky. And they don't. We have something with which to check. The computing I'm worried about, so it's not like I'm against the use of computation. Driver, you know, so self-driving cars, if done right, they're probably going to be much safer than humans. I'm a lousy driver myself. I try not to drive. You know, in Istanbul, you don't learn to drive as a kid, and I'm not that good at it. And if a computer can do that, I'm fine. The ones that are worrying me are the ones that are opaque to us, not like, you know, C3PO right there, but kind of mediating our interactions. But they don't have to be embodied. They're already right there. They're just sort of invisible. They're very complex. And increasingly, they're making subjective decisions for which we have no calibration. With a plane automation, you know, I have a goal. I want the plane to arrive safely. I can check the safety record. When Facebook is showing you, here's what you would like to see from your friends, We're deep in humanities territory. Who knows what I would like to see from my friends? When Google News is ranking the important things, what's important? What should I know? I mean, these are things that humans have grappled for a zillion, well, a couple thousand millennia, a couple thousand years for millennia. These are the decisions where there's no right answer, where we have this subjective decision making, and increasingly, subjective decision making in lots of fields is being turned over to computers. Okay. So, and this is happening in an environment of information asymmetry. You've got algorithmic, I use the word algorithm to mean complex computational decision making. I don't mean it, just sort of step by step thing. There's information asymmetry. We don't really know what these things are doing. And Facebook is manipulating my feed. I don't know what it's doing. And Facebook, I'll give a lot of Facebook examples because it's easy to understand. It's almost the least of our problems. Hiring, education, who to admit to schools. Increasingly, obviously, in the legal arena, they're making subjective decisions. And we don't own the data. It's controlled by people, and it's really complicated. Now, I do want to say, a lot of times when we think about computation, people think, oh, people will do weird things they've never done before. They won't. There's a long history of technology forecasting which presumes people will change with technology. People don't really change. The game they're playing changes. So I just want to put it out there that I don't expect people to do things they've never done. I just expect it to be a different environment. All right. So I'm not going to talk about all of this, but I just put the slide up there in terms of these are just like my research questions that I care a lot about that are introduced with computation. I will briefly talk about a few of them to give an example. And these are all areas that desperately need substantive experts in their fields looking into them. I will give a couple of examples of what I mean so you can see. And the reason I've been sort of doing these talks and writing all the sort of public writing I'm doing is that we are at this transition period where these C3POs that are not visible, that are not controlled by us, that are sort of enveloping everything, are increasingly being deployed in very consequential gatekeeping mechanisms as decision makers, controlled not by regular people, not even opaque to them, not audited, and they have all these issues, and I don't even see anyone really doing a lot of work on this. So well, let's talk about a few of these. So let's talk about latent inference. With all this data that is out there on us, what computing can do is figure things about you that you did not disclose. One term for it is computational latent inference of traits. You can call it whatever you want. It's like reading your mind of sorts. It's not magic. It's statistical. It works pretty well. For example, many of you have seen the New York Times article about the Target pregnancy. I will tell the story very briefly. This teenager is getting Target sort of marketing brochures advertising baby stuff. She's a teenager and she's getting diapers and cute stuff and baby things, and her dad is like, what the heck are these people trying to do? Induce my kid to pregnancy? So he takes these circulars and goes to Target and goes to the manager and says, what are you doing? And the manager apologizes, or we're sorry, and blah, blah, blah. A week later, he comes back, well, his daughter was pregnant, right? So Target had correctly predicted that she was pregnant. And you might be thinking this is done like she bought a pregnancy test or something like that. It's actually not like that. It's a lot more subtle than that. It turns out if you have enough data, there's a lot of things you can figure out. And it turns out that women, as they become pregnant, like in the very early stages, they do subtle changes to their consumption patterns. They start switching to organic milk. They start buying certain creams. A couple of indicators like that give you a pretty good idea that this person is pregnant and what their due date is before she might have told anyone. And this is a very simple one. What we found is that just using your social media data and this is an early paper, 2013, they used only people's Facebook likes, which is like a thin data set, right? Just things you liked on Facebook. And they had 80–90% accuracy guessing all the traits that are behind you. And this is not stuff people have disclosed. So you must understand the difference here, because that's sort of important. The data is betraying you even if you have not disclosed things. People who did not disclose their sexual orientation, people who did not disclose their political leanings, all of those things, they can be picked up. And this is an ethical research. It's done through volunteers who turned over their Facebook likes. And that's such a tiny bit of things that Facebook knows about you. And that is just what Facebook knows about you. So there's a lot of examples of Facebook sort of, for example, there's some examples we can't really confirm, but we have examples of young gay teens considering coming out before they've come out, getting ads for coming out coaching. Like, Facebook is able to demographically do these things. So this is latent inference, the data betraying you. And this is algorithmic, right? This is done in different ways. And this is dual use. So I have a friend who used social media data to do fairly strong predictions of the likelihood that a person is going to be clinically depressed in the next 6 months before the onset of symptoms. So again, she is able to computationally predict with fairly good accuracy who among us has a pretty high likelihood. So it's not like 3%, 5%. The statistical accuracy is 80, 90, 70, high enough to act upon, who's likely to be clinically depressed before the onset of clinical symptoms. She's thinking early postpartum intervention. I'm thinking companies are not going to hire these people, right? I mean, you're thinking, great, and this is sort of, I want to give you an example. This is an ad week, and I love doing sort of, if I had prepared a little better, I would have had more Mad Men examples, but I'm going to give you ad week examples, sort of behind the scenes. Marketers, ad week had an article saying, should take note of when women feel least attractive, because it turns out, this is from there, this is like how they talk. Women listed feeling lonely, fat, and depressed as sources of beauty vulnerability. And that is when you should market your beauty intervention to them. And it has this crude thing about which day of week or something like that. Now you can sort of see, right? They're like, if women are depressed or feeling fat or feeling lonely, we can sell them makeup, right? This is how they think. Now, Adweek also, researchers can predict depressions from tweets. So this is another business press. You can sort of see, Don Draper thinking. We can predict depression. We can also sell, blush or whatever, mascara to women who are feeling depressed. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, selling lipstick is probably the least of my concerns, but you can sort of see where this is going. Now, obviously, the impetus to use people's vulnerabilities is not me, right? These are ads from the, I think this one's like 40s. And this woman isn't kissed anymore because she doesn't have the right lipstick. Now, we laugh at this stuff, right? This is sort of another love match shipwrecked and all of those things. So this is not new. What is new is that if you remember the Facebook emotional contagion study, not only can they predict when you're depressed, changing the computational environment through which you interact with people can change your mood. Well, of course, right? If we see different things from our friends, our mood has changed. There's nothing new about the fact that we have emotionally impacted by our interactions with our friends. What is new is that that layer is now mediated by computational decision making. Right, so now a lot of these things also, these algorithmic models, have feedback cycles built into them. So I was in a predictive analytics for human resources people conference. And they were these people who wanted to use machine learning and similar techniques to do hiring. Now, hiring is notoriously subjective, and people are notoriously bad at it. I mean, people tend to hire people like them, which usually tends to benefit white people from elite colleges, especially men. So the human resources people were like, we are going to do a better job. We are going to move to algorithmic hiring, which will eliminate some of these biases and help us find some of the more qualified people regardless of their race and gender. And it's kind of hard to deny that algorithmic hiring could very well be less biased in terms of race and gender, because there's so much research that shows hiring it's an important gatekeeping, and it's done in a very distorted way in tons of regions. Fine. But you know what else is there in those hiring mechanisms that they were thinking of doing? Is their feedback loops. Because the system, once it starts picking a certain kind of person as likely to succeed, then that person is of course more likely to succeed. For example, as soon as they started turning the data, they realized that people who have shorter commutes have less turnover. Right? So if you want to hire someone who has less commute time. Well, guess what commute time corresponds to in this very racially segregated country? I mean, right? This is an obvious one. The country, the public transportation infrastructure in this country is very much segregated by race and class. So what you're going to do is you're going to hire people who have, I mean, I right now pay a much higher rent than I otherwise would, so I could walk to my office. You know, I can afford to do that. And if you hire me because I have, you know, nice, pleasant commute of biking, and then I'm great at my work because I'm not spending, you know, 2 hours on the road each way, and then you're like, look, my algorithm works. Well, what you've created is a feedback loop. There's a lot of feedback loops in these algorithmic systems. And there's also a lot of opaque systems in which the algorithm may well start not hiring the person who is prone to clinical depression. But if you're doing this through a technique called machine learning, it means you don't even know what the heck you're doing as a person. The thing is just going, variable x17 corresponds to this. You have no idea what this variable is. You don't even know what the variable, there's a variable like that. I raised some of these issues with the hiring people who are very attuned to the legally protected categories. You know, they're very attuned to race and gender and things because there's legal ramifications. But I was starting to tell them that their hiring systems would have these feedback loops and these ethical issues. And one of them was like, if I raised all this at work, I would be fired. I said, great. That's not very encouraging because there's a great pressure not to know. They do want to know the things that they'll be legally liable for, but they don't want to know the things they won't do. So there's all this feedback cycles. Same with Facebook. I'll give you Facebook examples in a minute. They're sometimes easier to understand. So when we optimize for variables, they have consequences. So I'll give you a Facebook example, which I wrote about, which is in one of the articles I believe John sent earlier. So I'm a social movement researcher, right? That's my other thing, is a lot of social movement research. So when I started noticing, on August 14, I started seeing pictures from Ferguson before it became big national news, partly because a friend of mine was in the area for a tornado. And he's a national reporter, so he ended up going to Ferguson where there was something really sad happening, and this young man had been killed, and the community was upset, and kind of sort of seeing it from the corner of my eye, because I have a lot of journalist friends, and they're posting pictures. And I started seeing these pictures that were so appalling. Like, I was seeing photographs, like there was a suburban community in the United States, and I'm seeing armored vehicles and snipers and dogs, and so community in mourning and is upset. So I was like, what the heck is this? Right? So I started posting like, what is this? I've been in Tahrir Square, I've been in, I'm used to seeing pictures like that from Bahrain, not suburban US. So I started tweeting a little bit about it, saying this is insane. Why do we have such policing in anywhere in the United States? But what happened is, the things got out of hand. It really was weird for a social movement researcher who does a lot of research in the Middle East. One of my friends and a reporter I haven't yet met, one was Wesley Lowerly of Washington Post and Ryan from HuffPost, I believe, were sitting at McDonald's charging. Because if you're doing any social movement reporting, like charging is the key thing. Wi-Fi and electricity, like that's the research. I would go around with an extra battery saying, can I interview you? Meanwhile, you can charge it while we talk. It's better than anything else we can offer. So they are, of course, at McDonald's that has plugs and Wi-Fi. So this Robocop-looking guy comes and says, leave, or blah. And he's like, why? Because they are national reporters. If a cop just shows up and says, do something, they're like, what's the legal basis? Are we arrested? What's going on, right? They know their rights and stuff. So the cop goes, and then a couple minutes later, they disappear. So Matt Pierce is from the LA Times, who's someone I know, is like, where is, Wesley and Ryan? And there's this weird Twitter search for these two missing reporters, which I'm like, again, you guys tweeting from Bahrain or something? I'm used to doing this elsewhere. And then somebody posts a fuzzy picture of them being loaded into a police van. But we think it's them. We're not really sure. And then it just gets totally out of hand because there's now national reporters and the police are arresting journalists who are sitting at McDonald's charging, and the McDonald's manager's like, I didn't ask for anybody to be arrested. So it kind of blows out of, what's the correct word? It starts getting the attention it deserves, let me put it that way, because it's obviously an unacceptable situation. And all my friends are tweeting about it. And all my Twitter feed is all about this. And my friends in the Middle East, like my Egyptian friends are like, what's going on in Ferguson? Free, Wesley. So it's just a bizarre situation. So I went to Facebook. I was like, let me see what my Facebook friends are saying about this, because it's taken over my feed. Nothing. Right? Ice bucket challenge. You guys remember the ice bucket challenge? Ice bucket challenge. Ice bucket challenge. Babies, ice bucket challenge. More babies, like, ice bucket challenge. So what's going on here? What's going on is Facebook's algorithm has a very specific optimization. It optimizes for likes, and it optimizes for things where you can tag other people. And Ice Bucket Challenge is like algorithm myth, right? You see it, you like it. I liked it too, right? ALS research, donation. I liked every single one I saw, probably. And you tag other people, and you challenge other people. But Facebook's algorithm does not give you a way to say, this is important, but I don't like it. So my friends, it turns out, were writing about Ferguson back then. But I wasn't seeing it. Facebook was algorithmically filtering it out. And mainstream traditional media wasn't seeing this either. You turned on TV, you didn't see any of this. It was after about 3 million tweets, and a lot of people harassing traditional journalists who are on Twitter too, did we first start seeing it. It snuck into MSNBC and CNN and then broke from there. It turns out Twitter's an interesting space. It's the one space in this country where black people and elites are both overrepresented. I don't think there's any other place where we have both those communities overrepresented, which has played a role in having this national conversation about race and policing. And now that tragedy in Charleston, all of these conversations that are happening, they may never have happened in an algorithmically filtered place that optimizes for engagements, baby pictures, likes, pleasant things, because a lot of things that we want to talk about aren't pleasant. So that's a very important, this is an example of how algorithmic gatekeeping can be significant. I was going to give a Twitter example, but I won't, because I want to show you guys one more Facebook thing and have, so this is a sad one. So Facebook I give Facebook examples. I want to say, I'm not picking on them as like the only thing. It's just easier to explain because this is happening in many spheres. So this one's a sad example. So Facebook's algorithm team is like 20 people, and it's headed by a 26-year-old engineer. Right? If you're 26, you're probably first job out of Stanford. You're Facebook's the head of algorithm. Your life's great. And it's the end of 2014, and they decided to algorithmically create a little celebration of your last year, because the 1.4 billion all must have had a great year, right? What could go wrong with the idea that you would pull you would algorithmically choose a picture for 1.4 billion people and put it in a party theme. What else, right? And then put the words, "It's been a great year." No, this one's sad. This person, Eric Mayer, is a CSS programmer. So he's from the Silicon Valley community. That's partly why he got a lot of attention. He's from this world. Had unfortunately lost his 6-year-old daughter to cancer that year. And you know, it's the end of the year. If you had the worst year of your life, and it's the end of the year, and you go on Facebook because you're seeking support or you want to commiserate, you want to talk. It's the holidays. What do you see? Facebook picks that picture of your dead daughter with the word, "It's been a great year." I know. He wrote this very anguished post saying, "Inadvertent algorithmic cruelty." And it's not like, you know, these are evil people. This is how algorithms sometimes work. Although I have to say, you know, everybody got a picture, and it wasn't always bad. Somebody got their ex-boyfriend's burning house as the picture that was picked, as "It's been a great year." So, you know, hit and miss. So there's one more thing I want to talk about, which is how algorithms make mistakes. Now, a lot of our institutions, including legal institutions, are geared towards human mistakes. But algorithms and computers, they don't make human mistakes. They make different mistakes. So let's see if we can make this work. So it's going to work. Jeopardy, I'm not explaining. And it's a competition between Watson, which is IBM's general intelligence machine, associational intelligence, and it's playing against, I believe, Ken Jennings in this one, who is the super duper Jeopardy champion who seems to know everything. All right, let's see.
Final Jeopardy category is U.S. cities, and here is the clue.
U.S. cities.
Its largest airport is named for a World War II hero. Its second largest for a World War II battle. 30 seconds, players. Good luck.
I can't fast forward this. This is like, I can't touch it. You have to wait for it. Right.
We come to you, Ken. You had 2,400 for this final going in, and you wrote down what is Chicago. That is correct, and you wagered $2,400. That doubles your score to 4,800. Down to Brad now. He had 5,400. I have to feel that he came up with a correct response. Did he? Yes, and the wager? Doing almost everything you can. $5,000 takes you up to 10,400. Now to...
Okay. So notice that Watson has 36,000. He's been wiping the floor with everybody, okay? So what did...
Our leader, Watson, going into final 36,681. And the response was, what is Toronto?
Okay, so this is an important moment because he's been wiping the floor. It's been wiping the floor, with Ken Jennings, who's brilliant at Jeopardy. U.S. cities. I mean, this is an error a second grader wouldn't make. U.S. cities. Now, admittedly, I may have once booked the Denver trip as Detroit and had to correct it, but you know, I'm from Istanbul. I have an excuse. How the heck do you make this mistake? See, this is an interesting thing about it. As a programmer, I can imagine, you know, Stack Overflow and blah, right? There's something, the machine error pattern is not going to be like human pattern. They're good at things that we're not good at, and they're bad at things we're good at. And we keep measuring them with our judgment patterns. We're like, oh, they're good at chess. I'm like, of course, chess is a structured game. And then we don't appreciate it when they do things like correctly figure out the emotional tenor of a conversation, which is very hard for them. They will make mistakes that are different. And all our institutions, including legal ones, are geared towards the human error pattern. So these self-driving cars, they'll probably be great, except one will run Windows and will decide to drive over the cliff on every second Tuesday of the month, right? It'll be something weird that keeps happening. So the error pattern is another question. If you're deciding an algorithmic thing, you have to think. So I talked about this. And finally, elections. Again, a Facebook example. This is my last example. A Nature paper shows that by showing one message that is slightly different, one message that says go vote, the other says here, your friends voted, just pictures, very slight difference. Facebook boosted turnout differentially by 350,000 in the 2010 elections. The difference between Romney and Obama, which is considered almost landslide-ish, is 400,000 in the right states. Facebook can stealthily and slightly nudgingly throw close elections. I mean, it's their paper. It's the paper Nature. And the paper was published like, look, we have a civic effect. And I'm looking at it and thinking, you can throw close elections. It's because the possibilities are endless. This one's an obvious one, go vote, you know, something like that. We have from research when people are afraid, they vote different when they're not. When people feel sad, they vote slightly different. There's all these things that can be used. So these algorithms don't just judge, and they don't just watch. They also nudge us in all sorts of ways. So there's much research to uncover, build, understand, and this huge transition, historical transition. And I want to sort of open it up to questions with our remaining time and kind of hear from, because I know that these are big issues in the legal arena too. It was actually, it knew that it wasn't very certain, so it didn't bid a lot. So it knew that it was likely wrong, but it's still Toronto it's just so interesting to me that it would make such a basic error, even though it's so good at so many.
So he still won.
Of course. No, wipe the floor with Ken Jennings. That's true. Questions from your comments?
So isn't the humans who are working for the mainstream news organizations, aren't they also opaque gatekeepers? Is there, what do you feel is the difference between that?
So I mean, I want to be clear that it's not like I'm nostalgic for human. Like, in hiring, humans are lousy. In journalism, there's a lot of biases built into what gets covered and what does not. But we have, you know, a lot of institutional setup trying to deal with it. Like New York Times has a public editor. So Facebook should have a public algorithm editor. You know, I want to hold, I mean, this is not a call for saying let's just have humans judge everything. We try to grapple with human misjudgment. We need to similarly grapple with machine misjudgment. And to do that, we first have to get outside the idea that because it's computational, it's like law of nature, it's like physics, it's not, right? There's a lot of ways, it's not some objective computation of here's what you should see. It's an algorithm that may have biases directly programmed. It might be a machine learning system that just throws up these things and you don't really know about. So my concern isn't saying humans were perfect. It's more like we are used to, like human imperfection is something we think about a lot and we try to guard against all the time. We're not that good at it, but we at least try. And these machines are being presented to us very often as neutral. Google's definition of algorithm, this is great. I mean, I don't have it here, but if you search algorithm on Google, it's like it's on Google pages, it says, I'm quoting, I have a screenshot, I swear. It says, an algorithm is a computer program that searches the web to show you what you want. I mean, Google programmers know that PageRank is not that. You know, it's PageRank. It's something, it works, it's great, but it's not showing me what I want, right? So that's kind of what I'm concerned about. In fact, for many years, it wasn't showing me what I want at all because I had a doppelganger, also named Zeynep Tüfekçi, that people didn't believe wasn't me because how could two people have such a weird name? It's Turkish, it's a common name. And she was a belly dancer for world peace. Try outranking a belly dancer for world peace, people. People didn't know me. And if you search for Zeynep Tüfekçi, she would pop up. And she had these sort of poses that didn't show her face a lot. So if you squinted, she worked at University of Florida as an administrative assistant. So just as she squinted, there was somebody associated with the university, short brunette, face not very visible, belly dancer for world peace. And I did not have an academic job yet. So an algorithm almost killed my career. It was not showing me what I wanted.
I feel your pain.
I'm sorry?
I feel your pain.
So, John Mayer, so this is my thing, is that Google presenting Google search as what you want, when for a long time it was my biggest nemesis in the world. That's what I want to sort of overcome and say, no, it's PageRank, let's discuss this. People? I'm sorry?
She just wasn't right for me.
Well, you know, once a reporter from New York Times called me to interview me the first time, and I'm still friends with him, Clive Thompson. He's like, I'm from the New York Times, I have a question. And you know what I was thinking? PageRank. If he quotes me, it's going to push her down. I'm like, for a couple of years, my whole life was like, can I get quoted in a place that will get her to page 2?
Hello.
I know.
I have kind of a silly question, but I'm kind of interested in your response. In your field, are Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking considered kind of nutty for thinking machines are going to take over?
I don't think they're nutty at all. I mean, I don't want to vouch for sanity of everything they do, you know, launching into space and weird things. I'm not going to vouch for that. But I definitely think that there's a major threat. There's a huge historical transition. I don't think we have a historical analogy to this. This isn't, the Industrial Revolution replaced manual labor, which is fine, okay, you know, who wants to dig ditches? And we had sort of the computational, the second phase replacing mental calculations, and of course you say, okay, who wants to do algorithmic, who wants to calculate logarithms, right? Now they're doing the humanities work, the emotional work. In one of my job interviews, when I was still outranked by the belly dancer for world peace, I interviewed at a school where they were developing emotional detection systems for kids with autism. Because it's hard work, right? Because you don't get the same social feedback. And they wanted to create robots to babysit these kids. And the person doing the research was presenting this to me as a wonderful thing, and how we could also use it for the elderly and all of that. And I'm thinking, okay, I mean, I understand using machines as supplement, but this is also warehousing people. Because we don't want to pay the caretakers good salary and relieve them every 2 hours. I mean, all these human things you could do to make the job acceptable. Instead, you're like, oh, let's just use this computation system and detect the emotions, things like that. So I think there's threats to human security. We have killer robots being developed. They're going to algorithmically decide. We already kill on metadata. They're going to algorithmically have wars with each other. in hiring, they're going to be gatekeepers. The thing is, I'm not against using these programs. I'm against the way that it's being deployed in a very particular way, without input, without consideration, without understanding, and very often in a social political context to disempower the employees, to warehouse people. It's not being done to enrich us for the most part. I mean, some of it is being done with it. So I think Stephen Hawking, Elon Musk, the people who are sort of worrying about things, one, I don't think they're insane. And I would like to go on the record that before Snowden revelations, I was considered paranoid. It turns out I wasn't paranoid enough. I mean, I was sort of the fringe edge saying, oh, there must be, like, all governments must be watching stuff, and people thought I was fringe. Turns out I wasn't fringe enough. The really paranoid ones were correct. And I think in sort of computational intelligence stuff, I think some of the dystopian visions are not understated. There's a real potential path to this kind of decision-making mixed with surveillance, especially given the level of corporate power and political disempowerment of people, which is my social movement research. It's like people trying to find their way into the system. So, no, I can't vouch for their sanity on everything, but I think I think it's an important warning for thinking about these things.
So I have a question. A common solution to problems of asymmetric information is transparency. But I have a feeling if you had open algorithms, people would look at them and say, okay, now I can see the algorithm. That
and they could
didn't
game
help.
it, right?
Yeah.
So transparency, I think, okay, it's complicated. I think it's overrated. Because without a power structure to accompany it, it doesn't always empower the disempowered. For example, I'll give you an example from India where in a lot of slum areas, there's no title records. Nobody knows who owns what. Well, it turns out that kind of practical obscurity, to use the sort of legal concept for it, was helpful in protecting people. Once you have transparency, the mafia landlords are like, okay, I know who to harass to get rid of you to build my, new shopping mall or things like that. Transparency by itself, if you don't have power structures that are responsible or accountable, could just mean we get to see the ways in which we're mistreated. And they also open it up to gaming, right? When you're transparent, the algorithm is transparent, it opens it up to gaming. Guess who's able to game things better? Guess who's able to outrank that belly dancer for world peace who's now on page 7, right? I mean, I have privileges and power, and I get quoted a lot, and then I'm able to game this thing. In fact, there are outlets that I wrote exactly once, because I know they show up on first, their little author page shows up on your first page of results. So I wrote a piece for Slate just for that, because I wanted to get 10 of them. I had all these things that allowed me to game, carefully consider. Now, you feel my pain, and I don't know how much you were able to, muscle out the other one. But
Jennifer calls me every month. Yes.
Right, but you see that transparency by itself, without structures of accountability that allow a counterpower, they usually end up empowering the powerful more. I don't want to say I'm against transparency. I just want to say if you just sort of make something visible but unreachable and untouchable, it doesn't help by itself.
So does anything help?
I mean, these are very political questions, and I think they don't have easy technical answers. These are very political questions.
Just a quick comment to bring a legal angle to this. There's an interesting documentary called Terms and Conditions May Apply that shows us how we're giving our permission for the companies to use the information this way. And it's available on
that's a perfect example of it's technically transparent. And to be honest, if you're in Turkey or Egypt, you don't use your Facebook, you don't have an open political sphere. So if you're a college student in the US and if you're not on Facebook and you're trying to date, unless you're so uber cool that you can say I'm not on Facebook, people are going to think you're a creep, right? There's refuseniks, and the refuseniks are often so cool that they don't have to be on Facebook but for the majority of the college students, if you don't have a Facebook profile, it's like your directory. Of course, the Facebook profile is also where parents are, so that's where they help little old ladies cross the street twice a day, while they yik-yak and Snapchat for their real interactions. So I'm not saying their Facebook profile is everything about them, but you have to have it. Now, if you are on Facebook, you are consenting. It's a coercive consent regime because a lot of these platforms are without effective alternatives. They are quasi-monopolies through network effects. Long other discussion why this is the case, but open and flat are not synonymous. You know, open systems can be very hierarchical.
Hi, I don't have a question. I just wanted to say that I've been following you on Twitter for a while, and I'm a huge fan, and I really loved your recent piece in the New Yorker.
Thank you so much. So on Twitter, I'm at Zeynep. So to give you guys how these street cred things work, how I got at Zeynep is a story that won't be told, because I didn't have it in the beginning. But it's a very crucial piece of real estate, because Zeynep is like Mary in Turkish. And it's a very common name. I mean, I can go to any part of the world and there'll be a Zeynep somewhere. So I'm in Gezi Park doing interviews. And I would go to people, you know, we're getting tear gas and there's police, and I'm there with a recorder, and I had IRB. I cried to my IRB. I said, you have to work with me to get IRB soon enough, because this is like my research. So I go to people, and the young ones, I'm like, hi, I'm a professor, and they're just looking at me like, can I talk to you? They're rolling their eyes. I was at Princeton that year. Here's my card. I'm at Princeton. They're rolling their eyes. And I'm at Harvard, rolling their eyes. Also, I'm at Zeynep on Twitter. I had instant street cred. Instant. And they would look at it, and they would say, oh my God, it's you. And that I had at Zeynep. Having like a platform like that, it's a quirky thing, but it greatly empowered me. Whereas like right now on Facebook, whether the Facebook's algorithm gives you a easy URL or not, or whether it shows your stuff or not, there's all these weird ways in which there's enormous amount of power in that's mediated through these platforms. That doesn't really come through it. So thank you for your comment, but I'm also, yeah, I have the first name that is very common. I'm also get all the time other people's at Zeynep, so it's interesting research for me. Thank you for showing up on a Saturday for this. Thank you for inviting me.